Last time we mentioned an announcement. Jesus, just like Isaiah, announced that the reign of God is here. Jesus starts off his ministry saying, if you want to see the kingdom of heaven, then look at me and look at what I'm doing. So he says that at the start of his ministry. If you were to keep reading on and journeying on, our expectations would only increase of, man, what could this be and what could it look like? 3 years ago, I was working through a workbook by Scott McKnight called Following King Jesus. And at the end of one of the chapters, he gave this challenge and he asked this question. Have you ever lived in a country with a monarchy, and how did that shape your view of kingship? So then he says, go look up some inaugurations, and like in 2013 in the Netherlands, or 2014 in Spain, or 2015 on the island of Topu. So I did that. And I grabbed some screenshots here. Check out these screenshots with me. All right, the first one here. This is King Philip of Spain. And he's in a parade with high celebration. The people are lining the streets. His car's being led by horses. They have those awesome hats on. And the crowds are just shouting, waving their arms and the flag of Spain. The next one here is the Dutch king, Willem-Alexander. And check out his robe. So long, so heavy and ornate. And those people have to carry it and have to move it around. The third one here is back to the king of Spain. Check out his crown. So much gold, so much embellishment. I love the red velvet. And look at that gold dome on top. And then lastly here, this is the king of Topu. And what a picture. He's got the long robe, he's got the crown and the scepter, and he is sitting on a huge golden throne. And I just love that he has the cross on the wall right behind him. What a picture. So never having lived in a country with a monarchy, I never really stopped to consider bringing in a new king with no expense spared and just as much pomp and circumstance as you can do to celebrate the new king. And so for Jesus, he's the high king of heaven. You would expect that as much riches and as much celebration, as much honor as the whole world could afford would come out for him. But there's this episode in the middle of the Gospels, specifically Mark and Matthew, and it's a conversation at Caesarea Philippi where Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he asks him the question. He says, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter gets it right. Peter says, "You are the Messiah. You're our king." And we all know, Jesus, that the king of Israel is promised to be the king of the whole world. But then Jesus begins to drastically reshape our expectations of what king would look like. Right after Peter answers that question, Jesus says, this is verse 31, "He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again." He spoke plainly about this. So Jesus begins to mold together the idea of the cross and his kingship. He begins to weld together the idea of his death through crucifixion and the idea of him becoming king. He tells them this multiple times, and the disciples, they struggle to understand it. But this is the idea that I want us to consider today. And I want John to be able to do it in his own words. And so I want to read from you a scene from John 19. And so as you listen, I'm trying to put my heart into it. I'm trying to put my emphasis into it. And I know that we live in a very visual culture, but if you could try to kick in your auditory focus. And so as I read these verses, Notice the portrait that John is trying to paint us. Keep in the back of your mind the contrast of these photos of the celebration and honor and riches of these other inaugurations that we've already seen. And so let's hear John in his own words. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. Pilate summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priest handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid and went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place as the stone pavement. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priest answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. And there they crucified him. And with him 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." This is a powerful scene. And the irony that John plays off of is remarkable. For now, I just want us just to stop and consider the mystery. A few years ago, my family was wanting to drive down the west coast of America, and we had started in Washington and we had driven down to Oregon, but we hadn't seen the coast yet. And the drive was good, but it was no different than any woodsy or foresty drive. You couldn't see that far. And then, in one seemingly insignificant turn, it happened. And every single person in the car went, whoa. There it was, the west coast of America in all of its glory. It was truly breathtaking. We knew what we wanted to see, but it was even greater than what we'd expected. Cliff lines that would rival Ireland's, and just everything as far as the eye could see, just ocean, and it was awesome. So I say I want us to sit in the mystery. A good way to think about mystery is in the Bible is that it's an open secret. This is in the same way that we rounded that corner and everything became open and we could see clearly and it was breathtaking. That's a good way to think about mystery, because what had previously been hidden is now disclosed. God wants to make it open, and he does that through the power of his Spirit. So the beauty of this scene, the glory of this scene in John 19, God wants us to see it. He wants to reveal it to our eyes. He wants to reveal it to our hearts. When Paul talks about this, he talks about it in 1 Corinthians 2 really as wisdom. He calls it the wisdom of God, that the cross of Jesus is the wisdom of God. He writes, "For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." We declare God's wisdom, a mystery that had been hidden and that God destined for our glory before the time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. He says, these are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. God wants to open our eyes now. He wants us to have our hearts open that we can receive the beauty and the majesty and the glory of this cross. It's an open secret. It's as if our eyes have been opened and we can finally see it. That the Lord of glory is the Christ crucified. That the Christ crucified is the Lord of glory. Because the most vivid display of who God is at the cross. The most vivid revelation of who God is at the cross. It's like we've been viewing this upside down inauguration. That when they placed the robe on Jesus' scourged back, that all the while it really was a kingly and royal robe. That when they placed the crown of thorns on his head, that all the while it really was a crown. And that when they lifted him up on the cross, that all the while it really was a kingly throne. What kind of God is this? What kind of king is this? That the robe, instead of riches, would be blood soaked. That the crown, instead of riches, would be blood soaked. And that the throne, instead of riches, would be a blood-soaked cross.